There are moments in American political history when the noise suddenly stops. No spin, no talking points, no excuses left, and all that remains is a voice. Not a rumor, not a leak, not a second-hand account, a recording. This week, the Department of Justice released audio so explosive that even veteran prosecutors paused before calling it public. Because on that tape, the voice you hear isn't an accuser. It isn't a journalist. It isn't a political opponent. It's Donald Trump himself, laughing, explaining, acknowledging, clearly, casually, that he kept classified documents he knew he was never allowed to have, and worse, discussing how to hide them. For years, Trump has survived scandals by turning ambiguity into armor. He survived because there was always room to argue, room to deny, room to reinterpret, room to claim, "That's not what I meant." This time, there is no room, because the words don't require interpretation. They don't depend on intent. They don't rely on partisan loyalty. They're recorded, time-stamped, verified, and once you hear them, there's no unhearing them. Within hours of the release, Trump erupted, posting dozens of furious messages, attacking prosecutors, judges, even his own former lawyers. Not with a strategy, but with panic. Because this recording doesn't just weaken his defense, it obliterates it. We're going to break down exactly what's on that tape, why the DOJ made the extraordinary decision to release it publicly, and how this single recording may permanently alter the American political landscape heading into 2026. This isn't speculation. This isn't partisan outrage. This is evidence. And according to legal experts across the spectrum, it may be the most damaging evidence ever made public against a former American president. Stay with me, because once we walk through what Trump actually said, everything changes. To understand why this recording is so devastating, you have to understand the story Trump has been telling the American public for more than 2 years. Because this didn't start with a tape. It started with a narrative. After federal investigators discovered classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's defense team moved quickly to build a simple, repeatable explanation, one designed not just for courtrooms, but for television, rallies, and social media. That explanation rested on 3 core claims. First, Trump said he didn't know classified documents were still in his possession. Any materials found at Mar-a-Lago, he argued, were packed up hastily by staff after leaving the White House. Second, he claimed he had declassified everything, sometimes suggesting a standing order, sometimes implying that his authority as president made declassification automatic. And third, Trump insisted he had fully cooperated with investigators. Any missing documents, he said, were the result of misunderstandings or mistakes made by his attorneys, not deliberate resistance. For a long time, that story worked, because without direct evidence, everything lived in the gray area of intent. Prosecutors could suspect obstruction, commentators could argue knowledge, but Trump and his allies could always respond with the same line: "You can't prove what he knew." That uncertainty became his shield. Whenever new reporting emerged, Trump dismissed it as hearsay. Whenever witnesses spoke up, he called them disgruntled or disloyal. Whenever documents appeared, he said they were planted, mischaracterized, or misunderstood. And crucially, whenever critics asked for proof, Trump challenged them to show his own words. For months, we knew prosecutors had audio evidence. We knew cooperating witnesses had provided recordings. But until now, the public had never heard it, which allowed Trump to confidently claim that the evidence didn't say what prosecutors suggested it did, that the context was missing, that statements were exaggerated, that investigators were twisting innocent conversations into crimes. This is how Trump has survived every major scandal of his political career, not by disproving the facts, but by drowning them in doubt. But the moment the Department of Justice released that recording, the doubt vanished. Because in under 4 minutes of audio, all 3 pillars of Trump's defense collapse, one by one. And once we examine exactly what's on that tape, it becomes clear why legal experts are calling this case no longer winnable. The recording doesn't start with rage. It doesn't start with threats. It starts casually. Trump is speaking to associates in what he clearly believes is a private conversation. No cameras, no reporters, no pressure. And that's what makes it lethal. Because this isn't Trump performing for an audience. This is Trump unguarded. Almost immediately, he makes something unmistakably clear. He knows exactly what documents he has, and he knows exactly where they are. On the tape, Trump references specific materials, intelligence assessments, military planning documents, and what he describes as really secret stuff involving foreign countries. Not vaguely, not hypothetically, specifically. That alone shatters the first defense, that he didn't know classified materials were at Mar-a-Lago. But then comes the line legal analysts can't stop talking about. Trump says plainly, "This is still classified. We definitely can't let them see this one." This is still classified. Read that again. This is still classified. In a single sentence, Trump destroys his second defense, the claim that everything had been declassified. You cannot accidentally misspeak your way into that admission. You cannot claim declassification while simultaneously acknowledging classification. His own voice confirms he knew these documents were sensitive, restricted, and legally off limits. But the tape doesn't stop there. As the conversation continues, Trump shifts from acknowledging possession to discussing what to do about it. He talks about the subpoena demanding the return of classified materials, not as something to comply with, but as something to maneuver around. He discusses which documents should be hidden, which storage locations investigators don't know about, which employees can be trusted to move boxes without asking questions. This is where the case crosses a critical legal line. According to former federal prosecutors, this isn't negligence, it isn't confusion, it isn't bad advice, it's textbook obstruction of justice. One former FBI general counsel said publicly he has never seen obstruction evidence this clean. Because Trump isn't reacting after the fact, he's strategizing in advance about how to defeat a federal subpoena. And then the third pillar collapses. On the tape, Trump openly rejects his attorney's advice to cooperate and conduct a thorough search. He mocks the idea of turning everything over. At one point, he makes it unmistakably clear they're not getting the good stuff. That statement matters more than almost anything else, because it proves intent. Trump understood the legal requirement. He understood what investigators were asking for, and he consciously chose to violate it while creating the appearance of compliance. At this point, every defense collapses simultaneously. He knew what he had. He knew it was classified. He knew he wasn't supposed to keep it. And he knew he was defying the law, all captured on tape. No interpretation required, no ambiguity to exploit, just a confession. This isn't the first time Donald Trump has been caught on tape. And that's exactly why this moment is so dangerous for him, because history shows us something crucial about how Trump survives scandals, and why that strategy may finally be failing. In 2016, there was the Access Hollywood tape. Trump was recorded bragging about sexually assaulting women. The language was so crude that networks debated whether they could even air it. Political experts said his campaign was over, but Trump survived. Why? Because he framed it as locker room talk. Because there was plausible escape. His supporters could choose to believe it didn't reflect real behavior. Then came the Georgia phone call. In January 2021, Trump was recorded pressuring the Secretary of State to find out exactly the number of votes he needed to overturn the election. Legal analysts called it election interference. Trump called it a perfect call, and again, he survived. Why? Because his defenders argued intent. They said he was concerned about election integrity, not cheating. The words could be reinterpreted. Then there was the Ukraine call that led to his first impeachment. Trump pressured a foreign leader to investigate a political rival, but he survived that too. Because supporters claimed it was about corruption, not politics. Because the transcript left room for argument every time Trump escaped through the same door. Ambiguity. As long as there was any alternative explanation, no matter how strained, Trump could weaponize doubt and keep his base intact. But this recording closes that door completely, because this tape doesn't require interpretation. Trump doesn't hint, he doesn't imply, he doesn't dance around the issue. He states facts. I know this is still classified. We can't let them see this. They're not getting the good stuff. There is no benign explanation for those sentences. None. You can't argue context. You can't argue misunderstanding. You can't argue political motivation. This is not about tone. It's about content. And that's what makes this recording uniquely lethal. It isn't about morality or character. It's about criminal intent spoken aloud. For the first time, Trump's defenders are being asked to explain not accusations, but admissions. And that's a fundamentally different fight, because once a jury hears those words, the question is no longer what happened. It's why he thought he could get away with saying it. The moment the recording went public, Trump had a choice. He could stay silent. He could let his attorneys respond. He could attempt a careful, controlled legal strategy. He did none of that. Instead, Trump erupted. Within hours, he flooded Truth Social with dozens of posts, attacking prosecutors, judges, the Attorney General, and even his own former lawyers, not with evidence, not with explanations, but with fury. He claimed the recording was fake. He suggested it was manipulated by artificial intelligence. He accused the Department of Justice of splicing together conversations to frame him. That reaction may have felt instinctive, but legally it was catastrophic, because this isn't 2016 anymore. In 2025, audio forensics are not guesswork, they are science. According to experts who reviewed the release, the DOJ anticipated Trump's response. The recording was published with full chain of custody documentation and independent forensic verification. Multiple audio laboratories confirmed the same conclusion. The tape is authentic, unaltered, and indisputably real, which means every time Trump calls it fake, he isn't just wrong. He's provably lying about an objective fact, and juries do not forgive that. Legal analysts point out something else Trump may not have considered. By accusing prosecutors of fabricating evidence without proof, Trump may be creating new legal exposure. False public claims can support obstruction arguments. Attacks on witnesses and officials can support intimidation claims. And every furious post becomes part of the evidentiary record. But there's another problem. On the recording, Trump speaks openly about his attorneys, about which ones would go along with his wishes and which might raise ethical concerns. That matters, because attorney-client privilege is not absolute. Legal experts say discussing lawyers as tools for hiding evidence, rather than seeking legal advice, can pierce that privilege. In other words, the recording Trump didn't know existed may unlock conversations Trump assumed were protected, and that's why his legal team has gone quiet. According to reporting from multiple outlets, Trump's attorneys entered what sources described as crisis mode almost immediately after the release. Prepared defenses were suddenly useless. Carefully crafted arguments collapsed overnight. One source reportedly told journalists that conviction is now virtually certain if the tape is played for a jury. For a man who thrives on control, Trump's response reveals something deeper. This wasn't strategy. This was panic. And panic is rarely a winning move in federal court. Once the recording was released, the crisis stopped being theoretical. It became immediate, personal, and impossible to contain. Behind the scenes, Trump's legal team was unraveling. According to multiple reports, attorneys who had spent months preparing defenses suddenly realized something chilling. There was no defense left to present. Every strategy depended on doubt. Every argument required ambiguity, and the tape erased both. Sources familiar with the situation described the mood as funereal, not angry, not defiant. Resigned. Because federal criminal defense isn't about loyalty, it's about plausibility, and once evidence crosses a certain threshold, continuing representation becomes professionally and ethically dangerous. Within days, reports emerged that members of Trump's legal team were considering withdrawal. Some allegedly told Trump directly that they could no longer continue, that presenting arguments contradicted by his own recorded words would border on malpractice. That matters more than it sounds. High-level criminal defense attorneys protect their reputations fiercely. They know prosecutors, they know judges, and they know when a case has crossed the line from defensible to unwinnable. Trump is already struggling to find top-tier representation. Major firms won't touch him. Experienced defense attorneys have declined quietly. Now, with this recording public, the pool shrinks even further. And that creates a cascading problem. Because as lawyers leave, preparation slows, motions weaken, negotiating leverage evaporates, and prosecutors notice. Legal analysts point out that Trump's position is now uniquely bad. He can't plausibly go to trial and deny intent because his intent is recorded. He can't claim misunderstanding because he explicitly rejected legal advice. He can't argue ignorance because he named the documents and their sensitivity. Even plea negotiations become complicated. Prosecutors have little incentive to offer leniency when the evidence is overwhelming and public. And Trump himself is famously unwilling to accept responsibility, which leaves him trapped between two losing paths: fight a case he is almost certain to lose, or accept consequences he has spent his entire career denying. This is the moment when legal jeopardy becomes real, not abstract, not maybe someday, but inevitable. And it explains why Trump's public behavior has become more erratic, not less. Because when the courtroom doors begin to close, the only stage left is the public one. The release of the recording didn't just hit Trump, it hit everyone around him. For years, Republican officials have defended Trump by leaning on uncertainty. They argued investigations were political. They said evidence was circumstantial. They insisted nothing had been proven. That defense collapsed the moment Trump's own voice went public. Because now, loyalty requires defending not allegations, but admissions. And that's a much harder sell. In the days following the release, something striking happened across Republican leadership: silence. No coordinated response, no full-throated defenses, no rallying behind Trump's claims that the tape was fake, just hesitation. Some attempted the familiar fake news line, echoing Trump's suggestion that the recording was manipulated. But as forensic experts confirmed its authenticity, that position became increasingly dangerous. Because once the evidence is provably real, insisting otherwise isn't spin, it's lying. And elected officials know what that means. At some point, they will be forced to choose between admitting they were wrong or being exposed as knowingly dishonest. Other Republicans chose a different path. They said nothing. They avoided cameras. They dodged questions. They hoped the story would burn out before they were forced to take a position. But silence has consequences too, Trump noticed, and Trump does not reward neutrality. According to reports, he began privately demanding public loyalty from allies, expecting them to defend him loudly and immediately. Those who didn't felt his anger. This created an impossible situation for Republican officials. Defend Trump, and you tie yourself to a recording of confessed crimes. Abandon him, and you risk his base turning on you. And donors are watching closely. Multiple outlets reported that major Republican donors paused contributions following the release of the tape, not because they suddenly opposed Trump politically, but because association with him is becoming toxic in a new way. This isn't policy disagreement, it isn't ideological conflict, it's evidence you can hear. Audio evidence is different. Documents can be debated. Legal arguments can be spun, but a voice, speaking plainly, is visceral. Voters don't need an expert to explain it. They just listen. And for the first time, Republican officials are confronting a reality they've avoided for years. Trump may not just be controversial. He may be indefensible. The real power of this recording doesn't end in a courtroom. It extends far beyond indictments, motions, or verdicts. Because once evidence becomes audible, it becomes unforgettable. This tape will not live in legal briefs. It will live in campaign ads. It will be replayed in 30-second clips. It will be slowed down, subtitled, repeated. Voters won't be told what Trump did. They'll hear it. And that matters more than most people realize. For years, Trump's legal troubles have felt abstract to many Americans, wrapped in dense language, filtered through partisan media, debated endlessly on cable news. This is different. This recording collapses complexity into clarity. You don't need a law degree to understand it. You don't need a journalist to interpret it. You just listen. That's why political strategists say this tape may reshape the electoral landscape heading into 2026. Not because it changes minds overnight, but because it hardens impressions. Undecided voters who tuned out the legal chaos are now confronted with something visceral. Moderate Republicans who defended Trump out of skepticism now face cognitive dissonance. And younger voters, raised in an era of viral audio and video, absorb this kind of evidence instantly. This isn't a headline you scroll past. It's a soundbite that follows you. Campaigns opposing Trump will use his own voice as their most powerful argument, not commentary, not condemnation, just playback. And there's another consequence that's harder to measure, but just as important. This recording reframes history. Years from now, when people ask how Trump's political career ended, it won't be explained through court filings or legal theory. It will be explained through a moment when the mask slipped, when performance stopped, and when the truth was captured accidentally by someone he trusted enough to speak freely around. Trump built his rise on his voice, rallies, insults, confidence. Now that same voice may define his fall. For nearly a decade, Donald Trump has defied gravity. Scandals that would have ended other political careers became fuel for his. Investigations that seemed damning faded into background noise. Every time critics said, "This is the end," Trump found a way to survive, until now. Because this moment doesn't ask Americans to trust institutions. It doesn't ask them to trust journalists. It doesn't even ask them to trust prosecutors. It asks them to trust their own ears. There is no narrator on the tape, no framing, no editorial, just a man speaking freely about things he knew he wasn't supposed to do. So the question facing the country isn't whether Donald Trump is being treated unfairly. It's whether a recording like this would be acceptable from anyone else. If any other government official were caught on tape acknowledging classified material, strategizing to hide it, and rejecting legal advice to comply with a subpoena, would we hesitate? Or would the conclusion be obvious? Another question looms even larger. What does accountability mean when evidence is undeniable, but loyalty remains powerful? Trump's base may stay with him. They may dismiss the tape. They may double down. But institutions can't. Courts don't respond to rallies. Judges don't respond to posts. Juries don't respond to outrage. They respond to evidence. And evidence doesn't care who you are. In the coming weeks, critical decisions will be made. Will Trump's remaining attorneys walk away? Will Republican leaders finally draw a line? Will voters treat this as another controversy or as a turning point? History rarely announces itself clearly, but sometimes it leaves a marker so obvious that future generations look back and say, "That's when everything changed." This recording may be one of those markers. Before we end, it's important to say this clearly. Nothing in this video is a declaration of guilt. That decision belongs to the courts, not to commentators, not to politicians, and not to social media. Donald Trump, like any other American, is entitled to due process and the presumption of innocence under the law. But due process does not mean denial of reality. The recording released by the Department of Justice exists. Its authenticity has been verified, and the words spoken on it are Trump's own. Our role here isn't to tell you what to think. It's to lay out the facts as they are, without distortion, without loyalty tests, and without fear. What you do with those facts is up to you. Because democracy doesn't depend on blind faith. It depends on informed judgment. And moments like this, when evidence is clear, emotions are high, and consequences are real, are when that judgment matters most. Trump built his political identity on defiance, on refusing to back down, on daring the system to stop him. Now, for the first time, the system isn't speaking through documents or accusations, it's speaking through his own voice. And the country is listening.